Hello everybody and welcome back to another local history story, and thank you to everybody who's been watching and commenting so far. Now today I'm going to talk about somebody who is one of the biggest names in Dundee history probably, but she is somebody that we know very little about as a person. And this is a woman called Grizel Jaffray, who was accused of being a witch in Dundee in 1669. Now, there's always been a lot of traditions in Scottish folklore about witchcraft and things you can do to protect yourself from witchcraft. So, for example, in the sort of farming areas around Strathmore and in Angus, one of the things that witches were said to do was transport themselves into your farm or into your house under cover of darkness, and they would steal milk straight out of the cow's udders. And folks said when you were buying butter, you had to look out for the colour of it, because butter made from milk that had been stolen by a witch was much paler in colour than normal butter. But there were also things you could do to protect yourself. So, for example, having a rowan tree near the house was good protection. And another thing you could do was hang up a horseshoe on a barn or a house door. And this kind of kept on as a good luck tradition well into the modern era, but it stems from being a way to protect yourself against witches. But during the 1600s in Scotland, you see a much more widespread panic about witches getting going. And this is something that came kind of from the highest up parts of society. It was very encouraged by the king at the time, and the courts would enforce witch trials. And it resulted in the death of hundreds of innocent women around Scotland. And it was something that was very active in Angus, and Forfar in particular was a big sort of hotspot for witch trials in Scotland. And you could be accused for a number of reasons, but one of the most common situations was if you had had a quarrel with your neighbours, and then perhaps a neighbour got ill or had some bad luck following this, you were quite likely to then be suspected of witchcraft. And you do see in witch trial documents that a lot of the women do sort of confess to the things that they're accused of, but this is often because they've been subjected to sleep deprivation and torture, as well as a way of getting confessions out of them. So Grizel Jaffray is certainly the best remembered woman to be accused of witchcraft in Dundee, and she was also the last woman to be executed as a witch in the city, but she was certainly not the only one. And she is very well remembered sort of in Dundee folklore, although we know very little about the details of her life, because a lot of the documents relating to her trial have actually been lost. So there's a few sort of overlapping stories that have sprung up around her in the gap of historical knowledge. But we do think that Grizel Jaffray was born in Aberdeen, and she was married to a Dundee brewer whose name was James Butchard. And they probably lived on the south side of the Overgate at a place called Calendar Close. And they were quite a well-to-do family, and it's often said that they had one son who grew up to be a ship's captain and went to sea. And one thing that we do know about Grisel is that in November 1669 she was accused of being a witch by 3 Presbyterian ministers from different churches in Dundee who accused her together as a group. And it's not obvious what it was that prompted them to do this. It is less common to see wealthy women being accused of witchcraft because they're sort of protected by being in a position of social power. But you do see sometimes accusations from people who think they might stand to inherit a bit of their fortune if the woman is kind of got out of the way. But one of the other possibilities is that Grisel was actually being accused because of her religion. So in Aberdeen, the Jaffrey family at the time were known to be very outspoken Quakers, and this was a faith that was held under a bit of suspicion at the time. So because all of her accusers were ministers, it's possible that they saw Grisel as somebody who might spread religious dissent in the city, and that was why they wanted her out of the way. But there are, as I say, a lot of wee stories about her, and one says that after her arrest, when she was being held in the Tolbooth, they kept her there for 3 days and 3 nights, and they had her watched over by guards because they were afraid that she would try to escape by magical means. And on the 3rd night, the guards got too tired and they dropped off and went to sleep. And when they awoke, they saw Grisel was floating suspended halfway up the cell wall. And they panicked and dragged her down. And as they did that, she cried out, "Oh, you might have let me be until I'd got the sowens of Balumby skinned." And the guards said that they looked at her and saw that the skin of the sowens was dripping from her hands. And sowens is a traditional sort of Scottish food that's made from soaking oats with milk. And so they said they saw that on her hands. And it's not clear where her sort of connection with Balumby comes from, but there is another tradition that says she planted a tree near Balumby Castle, and this is still standing to this day. And that story is quite interesting to me because it connects partly with the old traditions of witches sneaking in to steal food, and particularly milk-connected food. But also the idea of her being, watched overnight in the Tolbooth in case she tries to escape. It's more likely that what was happening was she was being kept awake so that they would have a better chance of getting a confession out of her if she was delirious with lack of sleep. But on the 11th of November 1669, the Privy Council of Dundee ordered that her trial was to take place. And the trial found evidence against her, and she was sentenced to be burnt as a witch in the Seagate. And this was, at the time, one of the standard places of execution in Dundee. And before land was sort of reclaimed into the river to build the current docks, the Seagate was pretty much on the banks of the Tay. And people said that Grizel Jaffray's son, who was of course out at sea as a captain, was coming back into Dundee after a voyage that day. And when he saw the smoke coming from the city, he was worried because he thought perhaps Dundee was under attack and was being burnt. So he sent one of the cabin boys ahead in a boat just to find out if there was any news. And soon the boy returned and he said, "The smoke is from the burning of the witch Grizel Jaffray." And without a word, the captain turned the ship around and sailed back out to sea, and he never returned to Dundee again. So there are a lot of little ways that Grisel is still remembered in the city today as well. For example, if you're out and about in the city centre, keep an eye out as you pass Peter Street, which is one of the wee closes running between the Seagate and the Murraygate. And you'll see there's a mosaic at either end of the close. There's a water picture at one end and a fire picture at the other. And this is a commemoration of Grisel and her story. And one of the other things people say is if you're in the Seagate at night, you might still smell smoke drifting through the night air or hear distant screams in the night. And there's certainly probably a lot less screaming around in the Seagate at the moment with the pubs being shut, but it's certainly something that reliable sources have reported. And there's also a stone pillar in the house, and this is said to have been placed there in memory of Grizel Jaffray. And can be quite hard to spot because it's not a sort of properly carved gravestone or anything. But if you keep an eye out for a wee pillar that people have maybe left coins on top of, because this is something people still do. And the tradition goes that if you leave a little something on the pillar, then Grizel Jaffray will come and help you in your time of need. Other people do say that this is the remnant of a pillar which marks where the Trades Council used to meet in the house, which is also an interesting story and potentially more historically accurate. But yeah, these are some of the traditions around Grizel Jaffray, and it's clear that she's somebody that still really captures the imagination of people in Dundee even today.